Her heart, a shattered thing, throbbed with each ragged breath as Serafina Beaumont backed away into the deeper darkness of the corridor. She had to vanish. Now. Before Julian Thorne or Isabelle Dubois realized she'd heard their monstrous vow. But where? Where could she possibly go when her entire world, the gilded cage she'd mistaken for a paradise, had just imploded at her feet? The shadows of the service hallway seemed to swallow Serafina whole as she bolted from the Skyloft residence, each footfall a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare pause. Down she fled, through sterile corridors and echoing stairwells, the opulence of her home now a terrifying, suffocating maze. The sprawling, indifferent lights of Aurelia City glittered far below as she finally burst onto a deserted service landing, the cool night air a shock against her fevered skin. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Her baby. She had to protect her baby. Her phone, clutched in a trembling hand, suddenly vibrated, shattering the fragile silence. Julian's name flashed on the screen. Of course, he'd be wondering where his distraught wife had gone after their little misunderstanding. She let it ring, then again. When it buzzed a third time, a chilling text message followed. "Serafina, my love, where are you? Please come back. We need to talk." Talk. The word was a grotesque understatement, a silken veil over a viper's fang. She knew what talk meant. It meant silence. Permanent silence. Her fingers stabbed at the power button, plunging the device into darkness. He wouldn't find her that way. Not yet. But who? Who in this vast, suddenly hostile city could she turn to? Most of their circle were Julian's people, loyal to his power, his money. Then, a name surfaced from the recesses of her memory, a lifeline tossed into the churning waters of her despair. Marcus Vance. An investigative journalist, an old friend, someone Julian had subtly, methodically pushed out of her life years ago, deeming him too inquisitive, perhaps too perceptive. Had Julian sensed, even then, a potential threat in Marcus's integrity? It didn't matter. Right now, Marcus was all she had. A flicker of desperate hope. Her fingers, clumsy with fear, fumbled through her contacts, praying his number was still there. It was. The call connected, ringing once, twice, an eternity. "Hello?" His voice was thick with sleep, rough around the edges. "Marcus?" She choked out, the name a prayer. A pause, then more alert. "Serafina, is that you? Is that Yong? You sound, God, you sound terrible." Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back finally broke free, hot and fast. "Marcus, I need help," she sobbed, the words tumbling out, raw with terror. "Julian, he's trying to kill me. Him and Isabelle, my baby." Another silence on the line, but this one was charged, taut. She could almost hear the gears in his mind whirring, the investigative journalist in him snapping to attention. When he spoke again, his voice was stripped of sleep, replaced by a steely urgency. "Okay, Serafina, okay. Listen to me. Where are you right now? Are you safe?" I don't know. I'm outside a building, downtown. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. Send me your current location, right now. I'm coming. Just hold on." He didn't ask for explanations, not yet. The sheer, unadulterated fear in her voice was enough. Serafina managed to send her coordinates. A grimy, dimly lit all-night cafe in the city's old quarter, the Cobweb Corner. A place Julian would never frequent. Then, she sank onto a cold metal bench in a secluded bus stop alcove nearby. The city's grime a strange comfort after the sterile luxury of the Skyloft. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every distant siren felt like it was for her. Could she truly trust Marcus after all these years of engineered distance? Would he even get here in time? The hope that had briefly flared now flickered precariously, threatened by the overwhelming tide of fear and the chilling certainty of Julian's ruthlessness. Waiting was an agony, each minute stretching into an aeon, her hand protectively, instinctively, covering the swell of her belly. When a dark, unassuming sedan finally pulled into the alleyway across from the Cobweb Corner, a torturous 20 minutes later, and Marcus Vance's familiar, solid figure emerged, scanning the street, Serafina nearly collapsed with a wave of dizzying relief. But as he spotted her and hurried across, his brow furrowed with concern. She knew this was only the beginning. The story she was about to pour out, the horrifying truth she carried, would undoubtedly drag them both into a vortex of danger far deeper and more treacherous than she could yet comprehend. When Marcus Vance's solid form finally materialized from the inky blackness of the alley, A wave of such profound relief washed over Serafina Beaumont that her knees nearly buckled. He guided her quickly, silently, through a labyrinth of back streets she didn't recognize, to a nondescript building, then up a narrow flight of stairs to a small, cluttered apartment. It was a world away from the opulent prison of the Skyloft residence. Here the air smelled of old books, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of printer ink. It smelled real. Safe for now. But as Serafina, huddled on a worn sofa, began to stammer out the horrifying events of the past few hours, the betrayal, the overheard whispers of murder, the chilling finality in Julian's voice, she knew she was dragging Marcus, her one potential ally, into a maelstrom of danger that could consume them both. In the cramped, yet oddly comforting chaos of Marcus's apartment, a half-empty mug of tea grew cold in Serafina's trembling hands. He listened, his expression growing progressively grimmer with each fractured sentence she managed to force past the lump of terror in her throat. The initial shock in his eyes hardened into a familiar, world-weary cynicism she remembered from years past. The look of an investigative journalist who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side. When she finally fell silent, the raw horror of her story hanging heavy in the air between them, Marcus let out a slow breath. "Isabelle Dubois," he said, the name a flat, hard stone in the quiet room. He rose and moved to a battered filing cabinet, its drawers overflowing with folders. "She's not just some opportunistic mistress, Serafina. You need to understand that. What you've stumbled into, it's far bigger, far more calculated than a simple affair gone wrong." He returned with a thick, worn manila folder, its contents spilling onto the small coffee table. "Isabelle Dubois, or whatever name she's using this decade," Marcus began, his voice low and serious, as he started to unravel the venomous tapestry of her past, "is what we in the business sometimes call a black widow. A professional predator. She targets men like Julian Thorne, wealthy, powerful, perhaps a little arrogant, a little easily flattered." He spread out a series of faded newspaper clippings, glossy photographs that seemed to leach the color from the room, and what looked like redacted financial reports. Serafina stared, her blood turning to ice. There were other men, so many other men. Some looked distinguished, confident in earlier photos, then hollow-eyed and ruined in later ones. Some, Marcus explained grimly, had simply disappeared. Bankruptcies, public disgraces, convenient accidents. Each story was a variation on a chilling theme. Isabelle, a chameleon, adapting to each victim, leaving devastation in her wake. "She doesn't just want Julian, Serafina," Marcus stated, his gaze direct and unwavering, forcing her to meet it. "She wants everything. The Thorne legacy, your personal fortune, your name, your life, and you, my dear, pregnant with Julian's legitimate heir, are the very last, most significant obstacle in her path." His words were brutal, but she sensed no cruelty in them, only a grim determination to make her see the full, terrifying picture. The folder wasn't finished with its horrifying revelations. Marcus pointed to a series of complex diagrams and bank statements. "This is where it gets even uglier." He traced a line with his finger. "For the past 2 years, millions have been systematically siphoned from the Thorne Legacy's charitable foundation, from your joint investment portfolios, even from accounts held solely in your name before the marriage, laundered through a network of offshore shell corporations, all leading back to entities controlled, very discreetly, by Ms. Dubois." Serafina felt a fresh wave of nausea. The depth of the conspiracy, the sheer audacity of the financial fraud was staggering. "Julian, he knew? He allowed this?" she whispered, the words barely audible. Marcus's expression was bleak. "Allowed it? Serafina, the evidence suggests he was either her willing partner in this grand larceny, or he's a fool so utterly besotted and manipulated that he's become her puppet. Honestly, at this point, does the distinction even matter? He's complicit in a plot to defraud you of everything, and potentially—" His voice trailed off, but the unspoken hung there, "and potentially to end your life." Then he produced one last document from the pile, a crisply printed legal paper. He slid it across the table. Serafina's eyes scanned the dense text, her vision blurring until one clause leaped out, seared into her brain. A recent amendment to their prenuptial agreement, one she vaguely remembered Julian rushing her to sign amidst a flurry of other routine paperwork some months ago. It stipulated, in cold, legalistic terms, that in the event of her demise prior to childbirth, her entire considerable personal fortune, along with her shares in the Thorne legacy, would revert entirely and irrevocably to Julian. The air rushed from her lungs. It wasn't just about the money from the Thorne legacy. It was about her money, her legacy. They weren't just planning to push her aside. They needed her dead. Soon. The chilling words she'd overheard Julian speak to Isabel, "No more Serafina, no more baby," now echoed with a terrifying, undeniable clarity. The truth laid bare in Marcus's small, cluttered apartment was far more monstrous than she could ever have conceived in her worst nightmares. They didn't just want her gone. They needed her erased from existence. But as the initial shock began to subside, replaced by a glacial rage, Serafina knew one thing. These predators, Julian and Isabel, thought they were closing in for the kill. They had no idea their prey was about to grow fangs. The truth, laid bare in Marcus Vance's small, cluttered Aurelia City apartment, was a venomous serpent coiling around Serafina Beaumont's heart, squeezing the very life from her. Julian Thorne, her husband, and Isabelle Dubois, her once closest friend, didn't just want her gone. They needed her erased from existence, along with the child she carried. But as the paralyzing shock began to recede, a glacial rage, cold and sharp, took its place. These predators thought they were closing in for the kill. They had no idea their prey was about to grow fangs. She knew what she had to do. It was a terrifying gamble, a plunge back into the viper's nest. Serafina returned to the opulent Skyloft residence, a changed woman, though she prayed no one could see it. She carried a decision colder and harder than any fear she'd ever known. She would play the broken doll, the shattered wife, all while silently, meticulously sharpening the daggers of her revenge. Julian met her at the door, his handsome face a mask of carefully constructed concern, his arms open in a gesture of false welcome. "Serafina, my darling, thank God you're back. I was so worried. You just vanished." His voice was rich with feigned relief. She allowed herself to be enfolded in his embrace, a shudder of revulsion rippling through her that she quickly suppressed. This was the man who had murmured sweet nothings to her one night and plotted her murder the next. "Oh, Julian," she wept, burying her face in his expensive cashmere sweater, the scent of his cologne now acrid and suffocating. "I just panicked. I misunderstood everything." She played her part to perfection, the devastated, confused wife, ready to believe any lie he fed her. And he fed her many. With Serafina apparently back under his thumb, Julian and Isabel wasted no time in tightening their gilded cage. The first move was insidious. Her trusted obstetrician, Dr. Alistair Finch, was suddenly unavailable for an extended period. In his place appeared a Dr. Evelyn Croft, a coolly professional woman handpicked by Julian. Dr. Croft prescribed new prenatal vitamins, stronger sedatives for Serafina's anxiety. Soon, a debilitating lethargy settled over Serafina. Her limbs felt like lead. Her thoughts swam in a perpetual fog. It was a struggle to stay awake, to think clearly. "You just need to rest, my love," Julian would coo, his touch feather light as he brushed hair from her face, his voice dripping with honey-laced poison. He watched her, she knew, studied her reactions, his dark eyes glinting with a possessive satisfaction when she stumbled or her words slurred. She was being systematically drugged, her strength and clarity stolen sip by insidious sip. Then came the public assault. The city's gossip columns and certain less reputable news outlets, undoubtedly fueled by Isabel's PR machinations for the Thorne legacy, began to churn out a torrent of poison. Sordid headlines screamed, "Serafina Beaumont, the Thorne legacy's troubled bride." Anonymous sources whispered of erratic behavior, of wild accusations, of financial impropriety on her part. Fabricated bank statements suggesting extravagant, secret spending appeared online. Carefully doctored photographs hinted at clandestine meetings. Old business acquaintances grew distant. Invitations dried up. Even casual friends became strangers, their eyes filled with pity or, worse, suspicion. She was being isolated, painted as unstable, a pariah. The gaslighting was relentless. The final turn of the screw came in a plain, unmarked envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside, grainy photographs of Marcus Vance. Some showed him entering his own apartment building. Others were taken from a distance, capturing him in conversation. innocuous, yet framed by the camera's lens to suggest intimacy, a clandestine affair if one were predisposed to believe the whispers. Below the photos, a typed message, chillingly impersonal. "Walk away quietly, Serafina. Disappear, or your journalist friend pays the price for your indiscretions. We know he's been advising you." The walls were closing in. The air in the skyloft, once fragrant with love and promise, now reeked of betrayal and danger. Yet, beneath the carefully maintained facade of the broken doll, Serafina's resolve hardened into tempered steel. Every false smile she offered Julian, every feigned moment of tearful weakness, was a carefully placed stone in the foundation of her counteroffensive. Covertly, painstakingly, she began her own secret investigation. The fog of the drugs was a constant battle, but she fought through it, using moments of forced lucidity. With Marcus's discreet guidance through encrypted messages, burner phones, dead drops for information, she started to collect the evidence they would need. A miniature recording device, disguised as a piece of jewelry, captured Julian's increasingly arrogant and incriminating boasts to Isabel over the phone. A tiny camera, hidden in a pen, copied documents Julian carelessly left on his study desk, offshore account numbers, transfer authorizations, incriminating emails he thought deleted. Each piece of information was a small victory, a sliver of light in the suffocating darkness of her gilded cage. Every day was a terrifying tightrope walk, the risk of discovery immense. But the thought of her unborn child and the burning need for justice fueled her dangerous game. Julian and Isabel believed they were controlling the puppet. They had no idea the strings were slowly, inexorably, tightening around their own necks. The days within the Skyloft residence morphed into a treacherous masquerade, each moment a calculated risk for Serafina Beaumont. Julian Thorne and Isabel Dubois, confident in their machinations, saw only the broken, pliable doll they desired. They were oblivious to the fact that with every feigned stumble, every tear shed under the haze of their prescribed drugs, the strings of their elaborate puppet show were, in fact, coiling tighter around their own throats. Serafina knew the risk of discovery was immense, a constant, chilling presence. Yet, the fierce, protective love for her unborn child and an unyielding thirst for justice fueled her dangerous game. And Julian, in his monumental arrogance, was about to hand her the very weapon she needed. He approached her one evening, a smug, almost predatory smile playing on his lips. In his hand, he held a sheaf of papers, a script. "Darling Serafina," he began, his voice oozing a sickeningly sweet solicitude that made her stomach churn. "For your own good, for the sake of closure, we need to set the record straight. This will help everyone understand." He extended the script. "Just read it for the camera. It's a simple confession. It will explain everything." He truly believed she was utterly defeated, a hollow shell under his control, too drugged and demoralized to resist. This video, he explained, was to be her public admission of all the slanders they'd meticulously crafted. The affairs, the financial recklessness, the supposed mental instability. It was the final nail in the coffin of her reputation, the key to him and Isabel consolidating their control over the Thorne legacy and, more importantly, her personal fortune. He had no inkling that he wasn't just handing her a script, he was handing her the noose for his own execution. Serafina's hand trembled, a tremor born of both icy resolve and genuine fear as she took the papers. "Of course, Julian," she whispered, her voice carefully pitched to sound broken, submissive. "Whatever you think is best." The recording took place in their grand, sterile living room, under Julian's watchful, gloating eye. Isabel was conspicuously absent, probably orchestrating the next phase of their triumph from afar. Serafina sat before the camera, a small, almost invisible device Marcus Vance had managed to get to her. Nestled amongst some art books, her makeup was minimal, her eyes artfully shadowed to look haunted, tear-filled. As she began to read Julian's poisonous words, her voice quavered with practiced emotion. I admit it all," she choked out, each lie a bitter pill. "The affairs, they were a mistake, a terrible weakness. The lies I told, the manipulation, I see that now." She even managed a few genuine tears, tears of rage and disgust that Julian mistook for remorse. "Julian, he tried to save me. He truly did. But I was beyond saving. Perfect. The performance of a lifetime." What Julian in his hubris couldn't see was the silent, digital dance happening behind the scenes. Weeks of clandestine, late-night communications with Marcus, a master of digital subterfuge, had prepared them for this moment. The video she was recording was not just a confession, it was a sophisticated Trojan horse. As her voice, laden with false regret, filled the room, a complex algorithm, ingeniously designed by Marcus and triggered by a specific vocal cue from Serafina, was silently, invisibly, embedding a heavily encrypted data packet deep within the video file's code. That hidden file was a digital bombshell. It contained everything. Every damning piece of evidence Serafina had risked her life to gather. Crystal clear audio recordings of Julian and Isabel plotting her demise, their contemptuous laughter echoing her deepest fears. Scanned copies of offshore bank statements, meticulously detailing the millions siphoned from the Thorn legacy, and her own accounts into Isabel's labyrinthine network of shell companies. Digital replicas of the forged legal documents, the doctored photographs, and most damningly, Marcus's own compiled dossier on Isabel's predatory history, complete with testimonies from other ruined lives, and a chillingly precise outline of their plan to make Serafina's death look like a tragic accident or a suicide, born of guilt and despair. The confession video, Julian's instrument of her final humiliation, had become her ultimate weapon. Later that night, after Julian had left, no doubt to celebrate with Isabel, Serafina, her hands steady now, accessed the video file on a secure laptop Marcus had provided. With a few keystrokes, she initiated the final sequence. The hidden data packet was armed. She then uploaded the entire video, her tearful scripted confession with its lethal payload, to a series of anonymous, time-locked servers. The release was scheduled with pinpoint precision, 10 p.m. on the night of the Thorn Legacy Foundation's annual gala, the very event where Julian planned to bask in his supposed victory and perhaps hint at his wife's tragic, self-inflicted downfall. The bomb was set, the fuse was lit. All that remained was to wait for the spectacular public detonation at Julian Thorn's self-congratulatory ball. The night the world would finally see the monster beneath the charming facade, and the night Serafina Beaumont would rise from the ashes he'd tried to bury her in. The bomb Serafina Beaumont had so meticulously planted was set, the digital fuse lit, timed with chilling precision. All that remained was the waiting, a taut, agonizing stretch of hours before the spectacular public detonation at Julian Thorn's self-congratulatory Thorn Legacy Foundation Gala. This was it. The night the glittering facade of Aurelia City's golden couple would shatter, revealing the monsters beneath. The night Serafina would rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of the life he'd tried to incinerate. The grand ballroom of the Aurelia Astoria Hotel glittered with an almost obscene opulence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped diamonds of light onto a sea of the city's elite. Titans of industry, political power brokers, media mavens, and socialites draped in jewels that could finance small nations. Champagne flowed like water, and the air thrummed with expensive laughter and the murmur of deals being struck in hushed, confident tones. At the center of this glittering vortex stood Julian Thorn, resplendent in a bespoke tuxedo, his arm possessively around Isabel Dubois's slender waist. Isabel, a vision in emerald silk that mirrored the predatory gleam in her eyes, smiled demurely, playing the part of the supportive partner. They were the picture of success, of untouchable power. They believed Serafina was a broken thing, her reputation in tatters, her spirit crushed. Julian raised his crystal flute in a silent toast to Isabel, his smile wide and utterly devoid of warmth, utterly ignorant that this was, quite possibly, the last celebratory drink he'd enjoy as a free man. He was on top of the world. The fall would be breathtaking. As the clock struck 10, a hush fell over the ballroom. Julian stepped towards the podium, a spotlight isolating him. He was about to deliver the keynote address, a self-aggrandizing speech about the Thorn Legacy's philanthropy, no doubt subtly underscoring his own brilliance. But first, a small, poignant video presentation, his grieving address about his troubled wife. The massive screen strategically placed around the ballroom flickered to life. Serafina's face appeared, pale, tear-streaked, the very image of the fragile, defeated woman they had engineered. Her voice, trembling and choked, began to recite the lies Julian had scripted. I admit it all. The affairs, the lies. Murmurs of pity and condemnation rippled through the assembled guests. Some shook their heads sadly. Others exchanged knowing, disdainful glances. Julian watched, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. Isabel's lips curved into the faintest, cruelest of smiles. This was their moment. Then it happened. Mid-sentence, Serafina's image on the screens wavered, dissolved into a brief flicker of static. A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's smile froze. Before anyone could react, the screens blazed again, not with Serafina's tearful face but with the cold, hard interface of a file decryption sequence. Text scrolled rapidly, and then the first audio file played. Julian's voice, unmistakable, dripping with contempt. Just a minor complication. She and the brat will be out of the picture soon enough, Izzy. Permanently. Isabel's cool, calculating reply followed, discussing methods, alibis. The ballroom erupted. The hushed whispers turned into gasps of disbelief, then roars of outrage. Julian's face, moments before alight with smug victory, turned a ghastly shade of gray. Isabelle Dubois went rigid, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into Julian's arm like talons. The evidence poured forth, a relentless, undeniable torrent. Scanned bank statements detailing offshore accounts, millions diverted from the Thorne legacy. Forged documents. Audio clips of Isabel coaching Julian on how to manipulate Serafina. More recordings. Julian threatening Marcus Vance. The carefully constructed edifice of Julian Thorne's life was not just cracking, it was exploding. Investors, their faces pale with fury and betrayal, were already on their phones. Their voices sharp and urgent. Journalists scrambled, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing, headlines forming in real time. The stench of scandal, potent and immediate, filled the opulent air. And into this maelstrom of chaos, the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. There stood Serafina Beaumont. Not a ghost, not a broken doll. She was a queen, an avenging angel, clad in a gown of blood-red silk that seemed to absorb and reflect the panicked, flickering lights. Her chin was high, her gaze an inferno. Every eye in the room swiveled towards her, drawn by an almost gravitational force. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound that seemed to cut through the din. She walked with a regal, unhurried grace, directly towards the podium where Julian stood, utterly exposed, his carefully curated world burning to the ground around him. She reached him, stopping a mere foot away. A chillingly serene smile touched her lips as she looked directly into his horrified, disbelieving eyes. "The curtain call, Julian." Serafina's voice, clear and steady, resonated through the stunned silence that had suddenly fallen. "The performance is over, and you, my darling husband, you've lost." As if on cue, uniformed police officers, accompanied by stern-faced individuals in dark suits, presumably financial regulators, began to move through the panicked crowd, not towards Serafina, but purposefully, inexorably, towards Julian Thorne and Isabelle Dubois. The trap had sprung. The reckoning had begun. Julian stared aghast, as the intricate web he and Isabel had woven with such arrogance now ensnared them completely. He reached for Isabel, perhaps for support, perhaps to shield her, but she recoiled, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal, already calculating her own chances of escape. The game was up. As Julian Thorne stood frozen amidst the glittering chaos of the Aurelia Astoria ballroom, the ruins of his empire crashing down around him in a symphony of public disgrace, Isabelle Dubois, ever the pragmatist, recognized the undeniable stench of a sinking ship. Her alliance with Julian had always been one of convenience, a calculated step in her relentless climb. Loyalty? That was a currency she neither possessed nor valued. While Julian was momentarily paralyzed by the cataclysmic implosion of his world, Isabel was already moving, her mind a whirlwind of escape routes and contingency plans. But could she truly outrun the long arm of the law, or the even longer, more patient reach of Serafina Beaumont's retribution? The chilling metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the hushed, sterile environment of the Aurelia International Airport's VIP departure lounge, a sound that brutally sliced through Isabelle Dubois's desperate dreams of escape. She'd been so close. A sleek, obsidian black suitcase, heavy with untraceable bearer bonds and enough cash to fund a small principality, rested at her feet. A forged passport bearing the name Chloe Devereaux and a first-class ticket to a non-extradition tropical paradise were clutched in her hand. She'd almost made it past the final security checkpoint, her oversized sunglasses and silk scarf intended to obscure her infamous features. Almost. But Marcus Vance, armed with the irrefutable evidence Serafina had gathered, had been thorough. An anonymous tip, meticulously timed and delivered with irrefutable details of Isabel's flight plans and her new, fabricated identity, had reached the authorities. Perhaps it was Marcus himself who made the final call, or perhaps it was an untraceable breadcrumb left by Serafina. It hardly mattered. As Isabel reached for her boarding pass, two plainclothes federal agents materialized, flanking her. Isabel Dubois, also known as Vivian Laurent, amongst other aliases, a stern-faced woman stated, her voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of embezzlement, and suspected involvement in illicit financial activities spanning several jurisdictions." The use of her former, equally notorious name was a deliberate twist of the knife. Isabel's composure, usually as impenetrable as a vault, finally cracked. A flicker of pure animalistic panic crossed her face before she smoothed it into an expression of outraged indignation. "This is absurd. There must be some mistake. I am Chloé Devereaux," she protested, her voice a little too shrill. The agent simply raised an eyebrow. "We can sort out the name later, Miss Dubois. For now, you're coming with us." Any attempt at resistance was futile. The click of the cuffs was deafeningly final. And just as the agents began to lead her away, a barrage of camera flashes erupted. The press, alerted by their own sources, or perhaps another well-placed tip, had converged, a pack of wolves scenting blood. Isabel, the master manipulator, the ice queen of Aurelia's high society, was paraded through the airport like a common criminal. Her face a mask of fury and humiliation as reporters shouted questions about the Thorn Legacy scandal and her litany of alleged crimes. Her meticulously constructed world of illusion had shattered into a million unforgiving shards. Meanwhile, Julian Thorne's downfall was swift and absolute. The Thorn Legacy's assets were frozen, its board members scrambling to distance themselves from the toxic fallout. Criminal investigations were launched, not just into the financial fraud, but into the conspiracy Serafina's evidence had so devastatingly exposed. Stripped of his wealth, his power, his carefully polished reputation now a public mockery, Julian was a broken man, a hollow echo of his former arrogant self. In his desperation, with nowhere else to turn, he found himself on the doorstep of the Skyloft residence, the place he once ruled, now a monument to his spectacular ruin. He looked like a ghost. His expensive suit rumpled, his eyes wild with a despair that was almost pitiful. Almost. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. The door opened. Serafina Beaumont stood there, calm and composed, her gaze as steady and unyielding as the city skyline behind her. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hatred, only a profound, weary stillness. "Serafina," Julian began, his voice a ragged whisper, the name a desperate plea. "Please, you have to." The words died in his throat. What could he say? She simply looked at him, the man who had vowed to love and protect her, the man who had then plotted to murder her and their unborn child. She saw not the powerful magnate, but a pathetic, unraveling creature. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thicker than the most luxurious carpets that had once adorned their life together. Then, without a single word, Serafina slowly, deliberately, and with an air of absolute finality, closed the heavy penthouse door in his face. The solid, definitive thud echoed through the opulent hallway, a sound that was, for her, the closing of a crypt, the sealing of a dark and painful chapter. Outside, Julian Thorne sank to his knees on the cold marble, a broken crown discarded in the dust. Inside, Serafina leaned against the closed door and let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for an eternity, the immense weight of years of deceit and fear finally, blessedly, lifting from her shoulders. The battle was won. The satisfying thud of the heavy penthouse door closing on Julian Thorne's ruined form was more than just the end of a confrontation. It was the sound of shackles breaking, of a suffocating darkness finally giving way. Leaning against the cool wood, Serafina Beaumont let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for an eternity. The immense weight of deceit, fear, and the relentless fight for survival finally, blessedly, began to lift from her shoulders. The battle, in its most brutal and personal sense, was won. The ashes of the Thorn Legacy and Julian's shattered crown were settling. Months later, the warm morning sun streamed into a beautifully appointed nursery. a room filled not with the cold opulence of the Skyloft residence, but with a gentle, hopeful light. Serafina, no longer a hunted woman, but the confident head of the newly revitalized Beaumont Industries. Her family's legacy, which she'd painstakingly reclaimed from the wreckage of Julian's dealings, cradled her infant son. She had named him Phoenix. A perfect name, she thought, for a life born from the ashes of such profound betrayal and destruction. He was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had endured. The war, it seemed, was truly over. Julian Thorne, stripped of his empire and his dignity, was facing a litany of charges that would likely see him imprisoned for decades. Isabelle Dubois, her web of deceit and manipulation finally unraveled, was similarly entangled in the unyielding grip of international law. Her days of preying on the wealthy and powerful definitively over. The whispers in Aurelia City had shifted from scandal and ruin to a grudging respect for the woman who had faced down her demons and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably victorious. Standing on the balcony of her new apartment, a space she had carefully chosen for its light and warmth, a true home cleansed of past shadows, Serafina looked out over the sprawling expanse of Aurelia City. The air felt different now, cleaner, lighter. She closed her eyes, allowing a rare moment of genuine peace to settle over her. Her son, Phoenix, gurgled softly in her arms, his tiny hand wrapped trustingly around her finger. "We survived, my little love," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she pressed a kiss to his downy hair. "We survived, and we won." A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It felt good. But as the words, so full of relief and hard-won finality, left her lips, her sleek, unassuming phone buzzed on the nearby table. A notification, not from Marcus Vance, not from her lawyers, not from anyone in her meticulously reconstructed circle. An unknown number. Her brow furrowed slightly as she picked it up. Just 2 words on the screen, stark and chillingly simple. "So the story has come to an end. Or has it? To those of you still here, still watching, thank you. If you've made it this far, there's a reason." Something in Serafina's journey struck a chord. Maybe you've known betrayal. Maybe you've stood at the edge of despair. Or maybe, like her, you've looked into the fire and decided to walk through it. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of rebirth, of a woman who refused to be a casualty in someone else's narrative, who took the ashes they left her in and rose. As the Stoics remind us, the obstacle is the way. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Serafina didn't just survive the trap set for her, she turned it into her greatest weapon. She became the storm that tore down the facade of those who betrayed her. That's the lesson here. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and unstoppable. Life will hand you trials. People will underestimate you, betray you, even try to erase you. But as Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Serafina chose to respond with fire, with strategy, with power reclaimed. And now, as she cradles her son, a child named Phoenix, she reminds us all, from ruin, we can rise, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. So if you're here and something in this story reached your heart, drop a comment, share your thoughts, and if you believe in justice, in rebirth, in fighting back, when the world says you're done, then please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share Serafina's story with someone who needs it. Because healing starts with being seen, and maybe, just maybe, it starts with stories like this one.